that structure follows function, the body is a unit, the body heals itself, and the body is self-regulating. And the waters he called cerebral spinal fluid the river of life. And he said the waters of man, the soul of man lives in the waters of the fascia.
Wow, and this is the founder of osteopathy.
Yes, yes. And his famous quote is saying, "He who is able to reason must know that unless withering fields are irrigated at once, all hope for a harvest of health is lost."
And what does he mean by that?
He meant that in order to have the brain function as a whole unit, a field of produce, we need to flood it with circulation. And the water is the cerebral spinal fluid, and it gives nutrition to the brain. It's the water of our tomatoes of our head. And here comes the next person comes is William Garner Sutherland. He's the father of cranial osteopathy. He was a student of Sutherland.
Of Andrew Taylor Still. He was
of Andrew Taylor Still. He was born in 1873 and died in 1954. And he said, I just happen to have this other little skull. He said, structure follows function. That's what Andrew Taylor Still says. Well, if that's the case, why is the skull, why does it have different bones? Why isn't it just a coconut? Well, it's got these sutures, he's got these joints. And he looked at the temporal bones and the beautiful sphenoid bones. And he said, my God, these bones look like they're designed to move. They look like the gills of a fish. The gills of a fish move throughout life. This must be why it is. And so he spent the remainder of his life experimenting. His wife wrote a lovely book called With Thinking Fingers, and she documented also his exploration. Yeah, and he put it in the old days. This is 1902, 1903, and in the 1910s around there. The baseball gloves was like a great big pizza pie. He put the baseball glove around his head, strapped it on. He also took his wife's beautiful butter bowl that they churned butter with, carved out one section of it, put it on his head, and put straps around it, so it would limit the motion of one side of his head.
So what did people think of this at this time?
Well, they thought it was a nut. And then he would ask his wife to record what would happen. And so one of the pioneers, we have to say, one of the pioneers of the work in cranial sacral therapy is Mrs. Sutherland, because she had to live with this funny man. And so what he experienced was, he experienced head pain. You would too if you had a wooden bowl in your head, right? But he had
so that's what we're
word loss, word retrieval loss, changes in his vision, longitudinal spinal back pain, and he had a lot of the symptoms that his patients were presenting with. And so from that reasoning, he said these bones and the motion of the skull must be important for health. And so he started formulating, using his hands to use the bones as handles to access this beautiful membrane inside the skull, called the meningeal membrane. And so he called cerebral spinal fluid, he called it the breath of life. And he said that in order for health, there had to be reciprocal tension mechanism. So there had to be a balance between the occiput and the sacrum. And he called the movement in the waters of the brain tides, as if they were water and ocean tides. And he said what we need to do is we need to be still and know. And if we be still and we listen to the body, it will express itself. He was a fabulous man. And then comes Upledger. And Sutherland also said we need to know our anatomy. We need to learn our anatomy.
So everybody's stressing anatomy. It really
they all
sounds
are.
Like,
they all are. And here comes my direct teacher, John Upledger. He was born in 1933. He died most recently in 2012. He was a wonderful friend. He was my teacher. He was my friend. He wrote the introduction to my first book, Lessons from the Sessions. He was a fabulous man. He was an osteopath, and he wanted to be a surgeon. He wanted to do surgery and prescribe medications, and he had a patient around 1970 by the name of Delbert. And this man had pain in his legs of unknown origin, And they saw a neurosurgeon, and the neurosurgeon said, I did see this one time in a rotation in Japan, and what it was, there was a piece of calcific plaque in the neck that was strangulating the central nervous system, affecting the nerves most distant, and namely the feet. So they did a myelogram, and they did find this piece of calcific plaque. They did the surgery, and Upledger was assisting, and his role was to hold the dural tube still so that this doctor can debride that little piece of calcific plaque.
And that dural tube, that's the membrane that's encasing the spinal cord.
Yes, that's the meningeal membrane, made of fascia. And so they opened the spine up with what they call laminectomy, and they opened the spine up. They could see the area that needed to be debrided, that the calcific plaque is like a little piece of dried fish food, a little like a cornflake.
Okay. Yeah.
And so here's the hole, and he was to hold it open. And what happened was the dural tube was pulsating and moving in and out, and in and out. And the neurosurgeon said, hey, John, hold that still. John says, I'm having a hard time here. What is this? No one in the operating theater knew what that was. So he did hold it still. They did remove the plaque, and Delbert did get better. And so they went on. Upledger was intrigued by that, and he went back and he looked into the foundations of osteopathy, and he bumped into the work of William Garner Sutherland. He started studying that work, he started taking classes, he became a nationally known cranial osteopath. He was given a grant to be part of a study at Michigan State University to prove or disprove Sutherland. So they had 22 researchers.
So he was proving or disproving
Sutherland's concepts.
The concepts of the cranial
That's exactly. And so one of the things they did, they used live Ricci monkeys, and they put electrodes on the parietal bones, and then they sent radio frequencies through those electrodes, those antennae, and they were attached to an oscilloscope type of thing. And so any variation of movement in these antennae would reflect in the motions on the oscilloscope. And what they found was the antennae were moving apart and together at a rate of about 10 cycles per minute.
Wow.
So here was living proof, that the bones move. He then went on to develop, there had been a movement within the osteopathic community of craniosacral osteopaths, and they had developed craniosacral therapeutics. And so Dr. John took a lot of Sutherland's manual techniques and created a therapy called craniosacral therapy. And he taught that around the world. And the Institute's still active. And he said that this should be taught to anyone with a good intention and with a good touch and a willingness to be of help. And he said that CST belongs to the world and not any one institute or any one school of thought or any one school, and that we need to share it with the world. And he said that if you're going to do craniosacral therapy, I challenge you to make the world a touch better. And it's from that he also introduced some really beautiful, he talked about intention. The touch is so light, why can we have an effect if the touch is so light? And he said the basis, the power of our work is based on intention. And he said that there's a consciousness in the body and a non-conscious. And we can access the non-conscious of the body by way of the cranial rhythm. Because the cranial rhythm changes and moves by way of the consciousness, the non-conscious of the inner workings of the body. Going back to the other founders that said the origins of the cranial rhythm are in the divine and come from our innate nature.
It sounds like another episode.
It is.
Okay. Thank you so much. We're going to continue on with this in our next installment of the series. My name is Cherise Bergoski. This is Dawn Ash here with me. I hope you tune in next time to your inner wisdom in fluid form. Thank you.
Thank you.
Check in again for more episodes on your inner wisdom in fluid form. Thanks for listening.
但你豔陽斜照，心興奮怎麼遮掩？回味撞人無數，天真的可愛笑臉，沒有了困倦煩惱，拋走了世俗負累，來共醉於此刻歌聲裏，譜出溫馨美妙，多動人尋夢調，傾出光輝歲月。
Because in craniosacral therapy, it's very important to have that free movement of the sacrum in between both hip bones. I personally see a lot of people that have chronic pain, that have trauma or high anxiety or have tinnitus or whiplash or concussion, and then I work a lot with the head and the bones, and I assess the movements that the bones make. In the skull, I work with the intracranial membranous system inside the head, which is the tissue inside your brain. And if there's been a fall or even severe trauma, then usually this is quite impacted, and I would feel for that and try and nudge that along to come back into balance and to in alignment. Another thing that we work with is sinus problems. This, for instance, is your superior sagittarius sinus. We will work with that to get the fluid better flowing again and to address any sinus problems, congestion, restrictions that there might actually be.
我哋唔會俾過多嘅，因為如果我哋順應頭先嗰個自愈全身5部曲，我哋係 feel 住佢嘅筋膜嘅流動，去帶動佢嗰個身體嘅反應。咁嗰個係佢身體做主導，唔係我哋嘅計算。咁所以唔會過多嘅。佢夠咧，佢就唔會 take up 㗎啦。咁所以頭先你話做幾耐咧？任何一陣洋葱皮嘅釋放都係一個好嘅治療嘅效果。喺我哋唔知頭唔知路，個 client 又唔知頭唔知路，原來 approach 話咧咁樣咧都有咧20% 大師級嘅療效。
我的大脑为你已经疯狂了，脉搏心跳没有你根本不长久，相遇了。谢谢。